Hi everyone, fellow New Westminsterites. I'm Susan Miller, your host. This is the third episode of our weekly series, Behind the Headlines. And as we're entering the holiday season, we're going to look at the lighter side of life here. How people in the city are working to provide some joy and wonder in our constrained world. We'll also hear from two residents who share what they eat for Christmas. Stories about our health and well-being are other topics, including the COVID cases in our area, the needs of our hospital, and also our local MP's initiative to get pharmacare instituted. First up is Laura Ranaletta of Queensborough, who talks about the efforts of the Queensborough Residents Association and the Queensborough Special Programs Committee to lift up the spirits of their community. I asked her how their work fits with the city's initiative called Shine Bright. So Laura, what is Shine Bright all about?
So Shine Bright picked up from the traditional activities that the City of New Westminster has done every year before this year. So we've always had the lighting of the Christmas tree at the Hayek Square and the Santa Claus Parade. And those two events were not possible this year given the COVID pandemic. So the city needed to look at innovative ways to share Christmas cheer, I shouldn't say Christmas cheer, to share holiday spirit. And some of the important things that we cherish as a community in terms of giving and kindness and joy and optimism with our communities. So Shine Bright was started using some of the funds that would have normally gone to light Hayek Square. And so there's 4 different quadrants of the city that are participating: Uptown, Sapperton, Downtown New West, and Queensborough. And my role was specifically to work on the Queensborough segment of Shine Bright. So the Queensborough Special Programs Committee decided to do an event that we kind of been thinking about for a while now, a little bit in the Lafarge Lake kind of thing, but a vein, but in a much smaller scale, of having an outdoor walkable space where people from the community and surrounding areas can come and enjoy the lights that we have.
So what is the big lighting project that you've done?
So there's two. So there's 2 lighting projects in Queensborough. The project at the Queensborough Community Center was put on specifically by the Queensborough Special Programs Committee, and that was headed up by Donna Bell Goyenko, and she and the team there worked specifically on creating a winter wonderland scene. So it's great because it's very close to the elementary school, and given that kids can't go on field trips this year, a lot of the teachers spend a lot of time walking throughout the neighborhood and talking about community. So it's been a great joy for children as well as children and their families to walk through that area. It's very playful and fun. There's a gingerbread house and a light tunnel and a family of snowmen and all sorts of fun candy cane, Candyland vibes there. So that's great. And the second display is at Port Royal Park, and that is put on by the Queensborough Residents Association. Now, both of these organizations are working in cooperation with each other, but Queensborough Residents Association was responsible for the Port Royal Park display. And there were a lot of things that we were thinking about in terms of developing the pergola at the park to put up some nice lighting, but we saw the opportunity to pay tribute to the frontline workers that have been working so hard during the pandemic, particularly now that we're in the second wave. Initially, during the first stages of the pandemic, our frontline workers were front of mind in terms of their sacrifices and commitment to our community. But now that we've kind of stepped back and are trying to live life as normal as possible, we're not necessarily remembering the sacrifices and commitment and risks that those individuals are taking working on the front lines. So this was a great opportunity to say thanks to those workers, but it also gave us an opportunity to work with the school to share that innocence of childhood, of children expressing their joy for the holiday season. And so the pergola is decorated with ornaments that have been designed by almost every child at Queen Elizabeth Elementary. And it's also lined with lovely garlands and holly and lots of lights and big ornaments. And then the tree itself is decorated with ornaments that symbolize frontline workers, as well as kind messaging to give our support to those individuals, especially those living in New Westminster. But I also like to acknowledge those individuals working and living in Queensborough.
Yeah, that sounds really great. So is it best to go and see this at nighttime, or is it something to see at nighttime and during the day at both of these locations?
So the lights in Port Royal Park are only activated during the night because they're solar activated, but it's still really great to see during the day. The lights are on 24/7 at the Queensborough Community Center, so you can always see what's going on there, and it's always exciting. But I always think lights are always a little bit more special in the dark, so it depends on your preference. You're
Right.
still going to get a great experience any time of day.
Right. Now, I heard also something about a train display. Can you tell me about that?
So the train display was actually put on by Parks and Rec. So that's at the Queensborough Community Center. So at the front, when you enter you walk across the bridge into Queensborough Community Center, there's a train. And that's part of one of the many different displays that were put up by Parks and Rec. There's lights throughout the city at Century House and at Centennial, and different areas throughout the community. There's lovely decorations also at Queen's Park, but the train has garnered quite a bit of attention at QCC, particularly amongst a wide variety of age ranges, actually. Parks and Rec has a significant amount of programming that's happening throughout this season, including things like take-home packages where you can do crafts with the family. And there's also like walking tours that you can take throughout different areas of New Westminster to see the lights. But I do have to say Port Royal and certain sections of Queensborough have really pulled up the stops, but Holly Street and Star Crescent are major highlights. Those houses and families have done everything they can to literally light up the grid there. And there's a lot of different areas, Spry Street, different sections of Thompson's Landing. It looks gorgeous.
Well, that should make everybody kind of perk up a bit over the Christmas holiday. I think that's quite wonderful.
Absolutely. Plus, worst case scenario, or if you have mobility issues or you just don't like the cold, you can enjoy a lot of this from a vehicle.
Anything else you want to tell people about this, what the Queensborough people have put on?
One of the great things about the moment when we turned on the lights at Port Royal Park was having ornaments with frontline worker symbols on them to give to each person who attended the official lighting. And that allowed everyone to do a little countdown for when the lights came on, but also to place an ornament themselves to be part of that activity of honoring frontline workers. So that was a really special time.
I totally appreciate you taking the time to do this for us.
Oh, thank you so much.
We are all seeking joy in these difficult times, but at the same time, we need to remember those who are struggling with COVID. City Councillor Jamie McAvoy is back to tell us what is happening in BC and in this city, and also what is known about people's susceptibility to COVID.
Well, the COVID story here in BC and New Westminster is not great. 11 new deaths yesterday, 724 total. The truth of the matter is we'll probably see 1,000 deaths in BC. The vaccine is coming, but COVID isn't waiting for the vaccine. In fact, Canada-wide, it's really at its height right now. We are seeing a leveling off in BC, but 10 deaths a day is not the leveling off that you want to be at. So we've had 624 new cases, 406 of those in Fraser Health. We have 356 people in hospital. We have 92 in intensive care, almost 10,000 active cases, 9,978, and 10,000 people in self-isolation, many of whom are waiting to find out. In New Westminster, we've had 86 cases over the past week of people who are residents here, and 624 total, with current outbreaks at Queen's Park Care Centre and Royal City Manor, and about a half a dozen exposures at schools. An exposure is in Fraser Health language, is a single person who has tested positive who has entered the school at some point.
So at this point, the outbreaks are not too concerning as far as the schools are concerned.
That's right.
Mhm.
And we're beginning to seeing the beginnings of a good news statistic for British Columbia, which is that yesterday there were 1,376 doses of vaccine given out, and we've had just over 2,500 total so far. So we're starting to have a new statistic to keep track of that's somewhat more positive and more hopeful.
Yes, that's great. So were they starting with people that live in senior residences, or were they starting with healthcare workers? What were they doing?
They're starting with healthcare workers who work in those residences. Um, that's been the way that the disease has gotten into long-term care homes in some cases is through staff who didn't know they were sick, and came to work, of course, because they didn't know they were sick. I think there's 1 or 2 cases where a staff person was symptomatic. So inoculating the people who work in the long-term care homes first makes sense, because then you're cutting off the transmission into the care home. From there, it goes to the residents of care homes, and also healthcare workers.
So I would imagine that the residents in the care homes that have been, are suffering from an outbreak, they're probably first on the list, I would think, or close to the top.
Other than the general categories, they're not saying how they've decided which places to send it to. But I would think that would be a common sense way.
And Royal Columbian Hospital, is it doing okay at the moment? Do you know?
It's doing okay at the moment. The outbreak that was there is over. I don't know how all the staff are doing. It's a pretty busy hospital right now, and so but they are doing okay. Our capacity for beds in British Columbia is okay, as long as we keep this level and it doesn't start getting more out of control.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about this virulent new English strain, which apparently is much more contagious. Is there any sign that may have come here at all?
There isn't, but there's actually hundreds of strains. That's how that's one of the ways where they've been able to know where the virus has come from. It's one of the ways where they know when it started in Europe. For example, we can do genetic analysis of viruses now, which we couldn't do in the past. And viruses are constantly mutating, mostly harmless mutations. But there is this one in Britain that's concerning and is being studied as quickly as possible and contained.
And what is known about the strain here in British Columbia? Anything in particular? Like, does it originate in some place in like Italy or China, or what do they know about that? Or maybe you don't know.
Yeah, they actually do know that the original sources of the virus in British Columbia actually came from a variety of places. Some people think it just leaked over the pond, but it actually came from a variety of places, particularly European strains. And in the age of air travel, and the people in societies who have money to travel by air, that's understandable.
Okay, well, Jamie, thank you so much for once again enlightening us.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun.
It's fun to meet you.
As much as this can be a fun topic.
Jamie and I had quite a long conversation about vaccines, including the Canadian capability to manufacture them, what the rollout is likely to look like, and a whole lot more. Check out my conversation with him in a new program, Conversations. Next up is our MP, Peter Julian, who talks about what must be the next priorities of the federal government.
I think pharmacare, and I'll give you two examples. I mean, families in New Westminster and Burnaby that are really struggling to pay for their medication. There's a family a few blocks from our home, and they pay $1,000 a month in heart medication to keep the father of the family alive, and the family is struggling to whether or not they can maintain their home and the $1,000 a month they have to pay for the heart medication. Another woman in New Westminster who is forced to pay hundreds of dollars a month in medication costs as well, because she's recovering from cancer and as well has Crohn's disease. And there are literally thousands of people in New Westminster that have similar problems, similar challenges, because the reality is 1 in 5 Canadians can't afford to pay for their medication. That means in New Westminster, 10,000 people that are impacted. That's why I think the pharmacare bill that we brought forward, that is born in New Westminster and Burnaby, and Jagmeet Singh is the seconder. So both on the Burnaby side of 10th Avenue and the New Westminster side of 10th Avenue, we've got a consensus that we need to have universal pharmacare, publicly administered, and end that struggle that so many people have to pay for their medication. According to studies most recently done by the University of British Columbia, there's 1 million Canadians that are going to be having to choose between putting food on the table or heating their home or paying for their medication. In a country as wealthy as Canada, that shouldn't happen. And the reality is pharmacare saves us money, because that bulk purchasing ability that we can have from a national pharmacare program will reduce the cost of medication. In New Zealand, some medication was reduced by 90%, because the bulk purchasing forced the pharmaceutical companies to lower their prices if they wanted to provide that medication to the market. So the parliamentary budgetary officer, who is an independent officer of Parliament, chosen to give Canadians unvarnished, neutral, nonpartisan advice, says a national pharmacare program, a universal pharmacare program, saves Canadians over $4 billion a year. Wow. So we can't afford not to put in place universal pharmacare. That will be a top of mind issue over the next few months. Secondly, the issue of housing. BC NDP government has built more housing in British Columbia than all other governments, both provincial and federal, put together over the last 3 years. That's why I think John Horgan was reelected so handily. And I really like to shout out to Jennifer Whiteside, our new MLA in New Westminster, who took over from Judy Darcy and was named the Minister of Education just a few days ago. That's wonderful, because it's a key and important role in the BC government. The BC's done its job, the federal government has not. And so we're going to be pushing the federal government to finally provide the funding for affordable housing that has been absent for 30 years. Since the former Liberal government eliminated the National Housing Program. We need to be building affordable housing. Many people in Westminster are struggling with that. These are some of the key issues that we actually are going to continue to fight for. And we hope in a minority parliament that the government will understand that they can go with the Conservatives, that's true, and move to the right and cut back on programs. But most Canadians want to see them shift towards what the NDP is proposing, and hopefully they'll be listening to Jagmeet Singh and the NDP caucus.
Any final words to New Westminsterites?
I hope people continue to work together. There's been a tremendous amount of solidarity through this pandemic. Our emergency responders are doing an incredible job. Our city council and our mayor are really working as hard as they can. The school board trustees, our teachers, our healthcare workers, nurses and doctors at the Royal Columbian, frontline workers who make sure that we're being provided with the food that we need for our families. I mean, these are all the heroes through this pandemic, and that's why every night we try to pay tribute as much as we can to them, and we've got to keep them front and center in our thoughts. I'm hoping certainly for everybody in New Westminster that folks keep safe and healthy during this pandemic. We still have, tragically, ways to go, and so we have to stick together. and keep safe and keep healthy and be smart, wear our masks, keep socially distanced, and keep working hard for an end to this pandemic. And it means being kind to ourselves and being kind to each other in this city. And that, I know the residents of New Westminster rise to the challenge, as we have in every previous crisis in our city, which is the oldest in Western Canada. We've lived through a lot, and I think we'll survive this too. We just have to do it together.
Well, thank you very much, Peter.
Great to see you. Thanks,
Yeah.
thanks, Susan. Thanks, Deepak. Thank you for all your work on behalf of the City of New Westminster.
Peter Julian's private member's bill for universal pharmacare goes to the vote in February, so we need to put the pressure on now. Sometimes the people of Queensborough feel like they are the forgotten cousins of New Westminster, as they're somewhat separated from the city, being on an island just offshore. Fortunately, the Q2Q ferry has started up again. I asked our Queensborough reporter Nelson Ellis to explain just where Queensborough is in relationship to the rest of the city.
Queensborough is on the edge of Lulu Island, but it's not very far away from the rest of the city. But it can be quite the traffic nightmare to get across the Queensborough Bridge and into the busier parts of the area. The bridge is a major commuter route, and a lot of traffic comes from the west, including Vancouver and Richmond. And you can walk across it, and you can bike across it, but on days like today, where it's raining, sometimes that isn't always ideal.
Well, I imagine it's probably not ideal either with so much traffic, right?
No, not at all.
Have you found that people are pretty happy that they have this ferry services? Does it make a big difference?
Yeah, I spoke to a gentleman who worked for the ferry, and he said people are really happy that they're up and running again. And he said that it's still a really popular service even with the current restrictions. And he said before the current restrictions, like, they would be packed. Like, there was always people riding on the ferry. So it's a very, very popular service, and one that people are really happy to be using.
So how long has the Q2Q ferry been out of service?
Yeah, so it shut down in March when the pandemic first started, but it started up again last month in November.
Aha. And when did it originally start?
Yeah, so it originally started back in 2018 as like a pilot project, and then it became a permanent fixture in 2019 until COVID struck, when it shut it down for a bit.
So now I guess they have some good COVID protocols in place?
Yeah, they do. They wipe it down. They wipe down all the high touch areas after every crossing, and they only allow 6 passengers per trip. And there's 6 passengers and 2 crew members, and everybody over the age of 2 has to wear a mask.
Uh-huh. And now what about bikes? Can you bring a bike aboard?
Yeah, you can, and that's really useful for people who are wanting to get around.
For sure. And what about animals? Can people bring animals across?
Yes, they can, but they have to be kept on the back deck.
The Q2Q ferry is more or less a commuter service, right?
Yeah, so it starts running up at 6 a.m. until 9:15 in the morning for people to get to work. Then it goes on a break and starts up again at 3 p.m. and goes until 7:15 in the evening, so people can get back from work. And then on weekends, it runs from 11 a.m. till 5 p.m.
And what about fees? How do I hear they're quite reasonable, but how do people go about paying?
Yeah, so when I took it, I just paid right as I went on, and it was pretty cheap. It was only $2. So you can buy individual tickets like I did. You can get a punch card, or you can get monthly passes on the ferry with a card or with exact change, or online, whichever is most convenient for you. And you can just look up Q2Q ferry tickets, and it will take you to the city's website, and you're able to find them.
Thanks to Nelson. Once the weather gets better, I'd like to take the ferry and have a nice stroll around Queensborough. Well, most of us have some kind of celebratory dinner over the holidays. I grew up on turkey stuffing and cranberry sauce, but I married an Indo-Canadian many moons ago, so we do a mashup. Salmon, because we are originally from the East, and nothing beats salmon, as we found out when we came here. And we make various Indian dishes such as matar paneer, sprouted mung beans, and chapatis. I was curious about what others in the city eat for Christmas.
Okay, we are originally from Colombia, we are from two different regions. So for Christmas, we had different traditions. In my city, I'm from Bogota, and normally we have two options, or ajiaco, that is a soup, a comfort soup. Nothing fancy, it's just more like the comfort and being at home with people that you love. Or we have tamales, but are different tamales than Mexican tamales. Don't tell this to Mexicans, but our tamales are way better. Because our tamales are made covered with, instead of wrapping the tamal with corn skin, they do it with banana leaves. So it brings a flavor that it doesn't have comparison. And also we add rice and 3 different kind of meats. So pork, chicken, and beef, and veggies and chickpeas and corn. It's really delicious. And this process for making tamales is not for every day. Making a traditional tamal could take 2 or 3 days on the making.
My goodness.
So this is a special occasion. So we had the 2 options. So the comfort soup, when we are just family and really close relatives, or the tamales when it's a super special occasion, we want to impress the guest. For my husband's region, they eat goat. So they prepare different dishes with goat, and it's really good. It's also really delicious. And there are different in different regions, they have different traditions. So for example, in the north, close to the coast, because they eat fish mainly, when it's Christmas, they prefer to have turkey. People who live in the Pacific, they have a big influence from Africa, so they have these dishes with plantain. It's so delicious. They are really into sweets. So making when you see a table from the region, is full of desserts mainly for Christmas.
Okay. And any special drinks around Christmas?
When we have tamales, we always pair tamales with hot chocolate. Bogota is quite cold at night, so it's perfect. Tamales and chocolate. In general, it's just wine and beer, or whatever people prefer, but we don't have a specific drink, only the hot chocolate.
So Emily, can you just tell me where you're from and what you would normally have for Christmas?
Okay, I was born in Manila, Philippines, the capital. We serve the ham and then the fruit salad with coconut. We call it buko salad.
And is the ham special in some way?
For us, it's special because we don't buy the regular ham that you see on the grocery stores. Or we buy we just go to the people that we know who made them, or you go to the Filipino store. I think it's because we like it sweeter. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to explain it why we prefer the one that we know. Maybe because we like it saucy sweet. It's syrupy. They call it Fiesta ham. That's the name of the brand.
Okay.
Or you go to someone who does it. Your go-to ham person.
Okay.
Sometimes we add chow mein and then rice and fish, but normally those 2 we have that.
What about your husband? Tell me where your husband's from and how you kind of created a mashup of.
Well, my husband is from Guatemala. His whole family is based now here, but he grew up here in Alberta. But then, because of the pandemic, we decided to split it into our Christmas celebration. It's either this year I celebrate it with my family, and the following year it's his. But this time, because of this whole thing, I told him that, you know what, we can make ponche. The Hispanic punch that I mentioned it on my email. Basically, it's like a fruit salad, but we're just boil it all together with some cinnamon stick, and add additional sugar. That is the Hispanic ponche.
Lovely.
It is, yeah. And I told him that recently because, we have a daughter together. I told him that might as well include this in our tradition, Christmas tradition, even though we go to your parents or we spend Christmas with ours. Let's do this as our own. And so our daughter would grow up, remembering or smelling that every dinner, or on the Christmas Eve dinner, smelling the ponche around when I'm making it.
Sounds lovely. Now, do you have any kind of special dessert at all?
Well, sometimes we buy flan. Well, Hispanic and Filipino food are kind of similar in that way. Sometimes my mom would buy ham or some special rice cakes, or sometimes if I feel like doing so, I would make the flan myself.
And what does she put in the flan? Like, is it got fruit in the flan, or?
No. It's just regular custard. I mean, it's just steamed egg and milk with caramel on top.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Emily, for sharing what it is that you eat for Christmas. That's very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I wish I could explain it more in depth.
I think you did a good job.
Welcome. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Hope you have a great day and take care, Susan.
Yum. I'd like to be invited to their houses for dinner. Next up is Jeff Norris. He's the CEO of the Royal Columbian Hospital Foundation. He describes the incredible transformation that the Royal Columbian Hospital is undergoing with its $1.5 billion upgrade. He's got a lot of fundraising to do.
Absolutely. We're in a fundraising campaign all the time, really, in the organization. There's so many big things going on at the hospital. And, pre-COVID, I think people are quite aware that the hospital is going through a $1.5 billion redevelopment. Now, most of it's government funding that's coming into that, but there's so many additional things that we can bring into the hospital to take it from a good project to a truly exceptional project. And we've been fundraising around that particular project going back, I guess, 3 or 4 years now, and we'll be fundraising right until 2026 when that project's completed. So absolutely, we're involved with that. But of course, this year's been really an exceptional time for healthcare, Susan, in that no one really expected the sorts of needs that we would have within the system that started in February and continue to this day. So we have been more active than ever in terms of reaching out to the community and trying to find different ways to encourage support of our activities in the hospital as it directly relates to serving patients around COVID. As one of the 3 COVID hospitals within Fraser Health, we continue to see large amounts of activity coming into the hospital and needing to do things in new and different ways. And donor support has been huge in terms of doing that. I mean, some of the really direct stuff that the donors have done is support some of these pieces of equipment and tools that are literally, and it sounds dramatic when you say this, when you talk about donor support, but are literally life-saving pieces of equipment and tools coming in. So, I mean, one of the great examples of a life-saving tool is something called GlideScope. So we've had 3 or 4 of them purchased very recently because of donations coming in. And these are devices that help our physicians and clinicians be able to put in breathing tubes into someone who's having challenges breathing. And if you can imagine someone's coming in an emergency situation, maybe it's a COVID case where, of course, their airways are constricted. Having a specialized tool that allows them to look into someone's throat and down and place that breathing tube where it needs to be is critical. It's super important. Obviously, people need to breathe. It's a life-saving technique. So having the right tool to do that makes a really, really dramatic difference. So we're encouraged that we continue to see great support in bringing things like that into the hospital.
So just, is there anything else particular to COVID? Because I'm hoping that you talk about different areas of the hospital and what the needs are. So is there anything else related to COVID that...
Sure. By all means. So there's a number of the things that as you would expect. We're seeing people present in the hospital as usually with some sort of respiratory challenge. So there's a number of things that we're using on that front that are being bought through donated equipment. So things like ultrasounds that can scan the lungs to make sure that we're treating things properly. Direct equipment that's actually used for monitoring patients' airways, that it's used up in our ICU. And we've been doing some really exciting research on that front of the hospital. One of our physicians who's been on NewWestTV before, Dr. Steve Reynolds, who's a real leading researcher around respiratory interventions, has done some great work, and because of tools that donors have been able to bring to him so he can look more closely at exactly what's happening, they can treat patients coming in for COVID better. And probably one of the cooler things that we have supported, and I would and it's making a big difference in the hospital, is we've brought in a germ killing robot. And this is and it's not just for COVID, but COVID is one of the things. But it is a device, or a robot as they would call it, that would go into a patient room or other patient care areas. Nobody's in there at the time, and special UV lights come out and disinfect the entire room. So again, just extremely important for some of the COVID response work we're doing. The other part I don't want to miss, and this is where we're seeing so many people come forward and support the hospital, is, you know, the struggle is real for folks working on the front line. You know, our healthcare system's never been under more pressure. And, you know, the equipment is a tool that people are using, and the people are the real cherished items within our healthcare system right now. So a lot of what we're doing within the foundation, or even within the healthcare system, is trying to make sure, you know, we're finding ways to support our frontline caregivers in their work, and making sure that they know that they're appreciated. So a lot of people are actually making donations, you know, towards, you know, purchasing things that may make a healthcare worker's day better as we go through the season. Early on, I remember you and I talking about in NewWestTV, we had a lot of donations of, you know, direct donations of food and doing meal programs and things like that in the hospital. But as COVID progressed, we learned one of the best things we can do is discourage any kind of gathering and discourage those kinds of activities. So now we're doing it sort of very individually packaged and those kinds of things to thank our caregivers. So if people want to donate towards that, that's certainly an option of coming forward. But that's, you know, that's a taste of some of the COVID work, but daily new needs come forward, and certainly donor support has been tremendous in making sure that we can support our hospital and doing its best work.
Just to follow up on that, the packages or whatever for the frontline workers here, what kind of things are people sending? I mean,
well, they're not actually sending like specific items. I mean, there's a few instances where that occurs, but typically what they're doing is making a donation, and then we can use that to encourage those kinds of programs. Just because of all the work around social distancing, and you know, the numbers of people that work in the organization, it's actually much more efficient to get the donations in and then organize, you know, sort of disbursements that we're getting out to everybody of different items, you know, things as simple as actually masks that they can wear home as something that everyone really likes, but takeaway packages that they're having for coming for Christmas, or things that we're able to do within departments, or even we're looking at virtual events that really try to sort of boost people's spirits going through. But I think sometimes people forget, you look at RCH, and depending the direction you're traveling by, you probably look and go, well, that's not a massive building, or it's not a huge campus, but there's about 4,000 people that work there. So it's a huge number of people, right? And so. Yeah. So a lot of times people will say, you know, coming forward and saying, well, I've got 100 of something or things like that. That's fine. We can target into department, but it's way better if we can, you know, take all the support collectively and do something for everyone working under the building right now, because, you know, it's such an important team effort that's going on. You know, people might think of, you know, the nurses or doctors on the front line, but you know, the cleaners are incredibly important. And the people doing the screening at the front door, and the people taking care of us in the cafeteria. And so, you know, we look at all those folks as such an important element of the team, and we want to make sure they support their work that they're doing.
Yeah, that's terrific. So now, are you also fundraising? I mean, you're developing this huge hospital. Are you also fundraising for some of the other expanded units? Like, I think you mentioned to me about the cardiac unit is expanding.
Yeah, so absolutely are. So the hospital sees, massive expansion across, the entire realm. The first part of that expansion, and people can physically see it, and it's open now, is the new mental health building. And there's still fundraising going on to support programs and areas within that. And we committed to raising $9 million specifically for that building and its programs and the expansion of work there. So there's still great opportunities for people to support mental health, even though that building is open and operational now, which is wonderful to see. But in our new acute care towers, we're going to see expansions of a number of the programs. So, for instance, our emergency department sees almost, well, actually more than a doubling of its footprint as it goes forward. And we're seeing donors come forward and support technology and equipment that's ultimately going to end up in that new area. And then we've got something called the super floor going into the building. And if you can imagine it right now, we have two main buildings outside of the acute care tower on the site that connect. And they happen to both connect on the second floor. And then when they build this new acute care tower, those two buildings will connect to that building on the second floor, turning that whole area into just massive, massive floor with our operating rooms and our interventional rooms. And the interventional rooms are really, really cool. I think sometimes people often, will think maybe they don't necessarily understand when we talk about a procedure or we're talking about an operations, which is a big difference. But a lot of times we're doing procedures that could only have been operations before. So for instance, our interventional radiology folks will go in and they'll remove a blood clot from someone's brain. Now they're doing this with a catheter running up through the veins and going and pulling that blood clot down. So a lot of people would think of that as like brain surgery. Technically it's a procedure. And a lot of times people can go home in very short notice through that. So that's one of those things that's going on that floor too. And that's a massive expansion of services where, again, people can support. So when we talk about departments, we're talking about neurology. And we've got the largest neurosurgery program in BC in terms of folks going through that. So neurology, neurosurgery, interventional radiology, our stroke programs go through expansions. We've got in an area of our cath lab, which is going to expand, we've got the busiest cath labs in all of Canada right now.
What's
we'll
a
see
cath lab?
a cardiac cath lab. And so if someone's having a heart attack or some sort of heart issue, they would come in, they'll run a catheter either up to the leg or through the arm into the heart. And that's the opportunity where typically it's a stent that they're going to put in, but something to open up pathways in the heart where there's an obstruction. And so we'll see more cases in that cath lab than anywhere in Canada. And so, of course, anywhere in BC, obviously, as well as in Canada. But then in our cardiac surgery program, we'll do more open heart surgery program or procedures than anywhere in the province. But those areas, if you come and sort of see the footprint, they're really undersized right now. And this expansion to the new building is a huge difference in being able to continue to evolve those programs and make sure they're offered in that way. So a few of those things. So I've said emergency department, neurology, neurosurgery, interventional radiology, radiology in general, just the regular scans, cardiac surgery, cardiac cath labs, all expanding within that. Our NICU, our neonatal intensive care unit, is expanding within that. And this is babies as young as 24 months coming through there, getting amazing, amazing care year in and year out. And this goes back 24 years. Our neonatal intensive care unit is one of the top ones across Canada. They do ratings and they look at the outcomes for the little tiny patients that come through. They do amazing, amazing work there. But again, they've been constrained in terms of the size of the units they've had. So we see expansion in that area. So overall, it's when we have this acute care tower coming, it's not just one program that gets to expand. It's actually across the hospital, and it's so needed. I mean, the hospital was built to service a much smaller population than we are now, and now we're up to serving a population of around 1.9 million. It grows all the time. But because RCH is a regional hospital serving everyone from Burnaby all the way out to Boston Bar and these specialized services, it's a massive population coming through. So yes, the hospital expansion is huge. It's supporting all those programs. But still, what happens, and I think it's a really good system, is the government funding will take us to a really good level in terms of care that we can offer. But the icing on the cake really is when donors are able to step forward and fund these enhancement projects that add more technology into it or add the best of care possible coming forward. So we continue to fundraise for that. And it's certainly an option if someone visits their website, rchfoundation.com. You can see all the information about what's going on within the redevelopment, what's going on now in terms of COVID, or what's going on with other programs. And the really, really nice thing, I think, for donors supporting the hospital is there's an option to make a gift to our greatest need, which leaves it for the the leadership of the hospital and the people that we work with to decide where it's needed the most at this time. But there's also the option for people to target it for a particular area. And it makes so much sense for so many donors. Maybe you've been through the hospital and you've had a heart surgery and you want to make sure you're giving back to that area. So I love the fact that people have these options of targeting their donation or giving it in a general way.
Wow, I think you have your work cut out for you. Are you planning on retiring at some point?
Well, I definitely plan to be here for the duration of the build, which takes us out to 2026. But you know what, Susan, I'm super busy in terms of the work I'm doing, and our staff at the foundation are super busy. But the hospital and the folks working there are incredibly busy. And I've got to say, it's been a huge privilege to work in that environment and to be part of the solution of what's going on today and offering that healthcare. And I've worked in other hospitals and I've worked in other organizations and institutions, and we've got such a collegial environment within RCH. I mean, that's something I think that makes it really, really special, and people have over time developed to work really well together. And I'm not going to say that's typical in hospitals, because you've got sort of the people that have strived and worked hard to get where they are, and so sometimes that comes with ego, but not at Royal Columbian Hospital. I mean, people really sort of band together and work hard at it. So it's a lot of work for everybody, but it's really rewarding to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and certainly working with people that are just truly exceptional, and I just don't want to let them down. I want to make sure we do what we can do to help them out.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was fabulous.
Great. Thanks, Deepak. Thanks, Susan.
Okay, take care. Best wishes to all of you during this holiday season. We'll be taking a couple of weeks off before starting up again. We will likely rejig our format, as it's rather onerous. We need more volunteers to help. If you are interested in helping out by reporting on stories in the city or doing camera work, we would love to hear from you. Check out our website, www.NewWest.tv. We'll be back. We are committed to giving our city the ability to connect with New West stories, issues, and people. My very best wishes to you all. See you in January.